It's about UN-GGIM Europe Core Data Initiative, encouraging geographic information in supporting the Sustainable Development Goals. So it's a long title, and the introduction will be in a way to explain this title. So what is UN-GGIM? It's an acronym for United Nations Initiative on Geographic Information Management. It's an initiative that is already 6 years old. It began in 2011. It's a strong implication of the statistical community. It was created within the Statistical Division of United Nations. And there are activities at global level, but also at regional level, for instance, in Europe, in Africa, in America, and so on. In my presentation, I will talk only about European level. What is core data? There are different understandings of core data. There is a working group in Europe proposing this initiative on core data, and the main purpose of this initiative is to encourage the availability of core data content. It's really to encourage the production of new data, the improvement of existing data, if there are gaps in core data. So it's really about encouraging production. And the definition we have chosen for core data is priority data that is geographic, that has a location, and that is considered as the most useful to analyze, achieve, and monitor the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals, either directly or indirectly. The core data initiative itself, it's about defining priorities. We have two phases in our work. The first one is about the scope, which themes, and the phase two is about defining the relevant content for each selected theme. I will talk mainly about phase one. And it's, as I already said, about encouraging production of new data, and the deliverables of this group will be recommendation. It's not a legal context as is in SPI, it's really recommendation, but with some UN weight. So what about geographic information for SDG? We have the SDG. There are 17 SDGs that were agreed by member states, addressing all components of sustainable development, environment, of course, but also society, economy. These SDG are detailed. We have the 17 SDG, but we have also more detailed targets, around 100 targets. A goal is divided into several targets. And there are also a big set of indicators to measure these targets. So how did we process in the core data initiative? We had a 5-step approach to identify the priority data themes. First, identifying the targets that consume geographic information. And the second one, maybe the most important, it was to identify the actions enabling to reach these targets. Once again, we want the data that is the most necessary, not only for analyzing, but for achieving the targets. We identify the required data for each action, and we make summary by use case maps as basis for discussion and for selecting. So the first point was about identifying the targets consuming geographic information. So you have the SDG, the goals, and according to the SDG, you may have up to maybe between 6 or more than 10 targets. In green, you have those consuming geographic information. An example, goal 7 is about energy, and you have more detailed targets, for instance, about making energy accessible, making it renewable, making it more efficient. Then we try to identify the actions enabling to reach these targets according to three main phases: analysis, understand the issue; operational, make decision, but also monitoring, check if decisions are applied and efficient; and identify the required data. It will be shown in parallel. So 2 examples. The first one is well-known. It's about the risk. There are several targets in the SDG that are related to risk, to disaster, making people less vulnerable to disaster, more resilient. So, how to do? First point is to assess the risk. You have to forecast the hazard. There are several ways to do it. You can do it using historical data. So you need, for instance, natural hazard zones. You can do also by physical modeling. For instance, locating the hazard source. It may be meteorological features, for instance, for flood. It may be geology for earthquake, for volcanoes. It may be production facilities for industrial risk. You have also to forecast the hazard propagation. For instance, you will need elevation because it's really depending on the relief. You need also the meteo, and you can get also the risk zone. You have also not only to forecast when there is hazard, but also to assess the impact. And for this, you need, for instance, to assess the number of persons. So you will need, of course, data about statistical units and population distribution, about buildings, to transfer this data to the area of interest, because generally the hazard area is not the same as a statistical unit. You have also to locate the most valuable assets, of course, the buildings, the production facilities, the protected sites, and so on. Risk is not only about predicting the risk, but it's also about managing the risk. So, for instance, you need to mitigate risk before the disaster. You have also the emergency response during the disaster, and you have the recovery after the disaster. So mitigating risk, for instance, it's making spatial planning. So at the end, you will have land use. It's building protective construction and finding the right place to build them. It's communicate to citizens, giving advice. For instance, finding the owners to encourage them to have sustainable behavior, to make their buildings less vulnerable to risk or less energy consuming. To build this protective, monitor the buildings with cadastral parcel and buildings for protective construction, finding the suitable location. And you need, once again, cadastral parcel to find the owners. Be sure you can build on this, knowing the regulation applying on this area. And you need also the physical aspect, for instance, about elevation, to be sure that it's the relevant place. During the emergency response, you need also to communicate to citizens. You need to manage emergency rescue. For instance, there is need for transport, to compute itineraries, for governmental service, whereas the hospitals. During the recovery, you need to assess the damage, to launch restoration operation, and generally it's ortho-image that is the most needed. So really a very wide use of geographic information in all the phase of risk managing. Not only to analyze the risk, but to help to find solutions. Another example, maybe less known, is about forest example. There is a sustainable development goals about forest to make it more sustainable. So what can we do for this? Of course, you have to understand the issue, to make state of play, to identify the trends. So you need lots of data, mainly land cover, to know where the forests are, but you need to know also about soils, about cadastral parcel, to understand how wide the forests are or not, land use, and so on. And what can you do to improve the things? You can protect biodiversity. For this, you will need protected sites. You can encourage better exploitation of forest. For instance, trying to get better forest properties. Typically, it's the case in France. We have very small properties, and we try to push people to have bigger properties, to have better exploitation. So you need data about cadastral parcels. For instance, to make land consolidation or to use the preemption rights. You can have also to make a new forestry road. And once again, you need cadastral parcel to find the owners. Are they willing to exploit the forest? If not, it's not worth to make a road. You need to know what is the existing road, what is the elevation. If it's too steep, maybe helicopter is better than a road. You must also push people, owners, to use wood as renewable, exploit wood as renewable resources. And the data, once again, of course, you need to assess the volume of wood, so land cover, species distribution, but also pushing the owners to make management plans, because making management plan is a way to have sustainable exploitation. So know the owners, need cadastral parcel, and know the management plan already existing, see the gap, and push where there are gaps to make new ones. Advise relevant species for climate change, and this may be done, for instance, using software and modeling. And once again, you need meteorological feature to know how much rain is available, soil, elevation, and so on. So really, it's consuming lots of geographic information. Avoid deforestation around cities by spatial planning, and once again, it's land use. So I think I am preaching to convince people the wide interest of geographic information for sustainable development. In practice, we documented the data required for each of these actions in Excel table. They are available on UN-GGIM website. For those who are interested, you can find more detailed information in this Excel table. We made some summary by use case map for each theme, trying to see how the data is useful. It may be useful, for instance, for elevation in an indirect way to derive other products such as ortho-image or drainage basin, and it may be useful in the three phase: analysis, decision, monitoring, and also communication that is very transversal. And the greener it is, the most important it is, of course. And we made selection based on this analysis, and at the end of the day, we selected, I think, 14 themes among the inspired one, of course in Annex 1, but also in Annex 2 and in Annex 3. Some general, I don't know how long I have, 2 minutes, fine. So it's fine for conclusion. So how does GI support the SDG? Of course, the main use is to understand the issue. Lots of information are required. You require, of course, core geographic information, but you require quite more. For instance, environmental information, meteorology, soil, biodiversity, oceanography, environmental facilities, and all the measures. You need statistical data. Core geographic data is not going to solve all the issue by itself. There is need for lots of other data. You have to make decisions to find solutions. And geographic data is very useful, for instance, for spatial planning. It's really a key tool for public action. It's also to find the best location for new infrastructure. It's also to push citizens, for instance, owners, to have this more sustainable behavior. So in this operational phase, there is really a key role of core geographic data. We need what I call administrative themes in a wide meaning, not only administrative themes, but administrative units, but also address, cadastral parcel, and so on. And there is need also for topographic themes, elevation, transport network, for instance, but more also. Something important also, and I would like to insist on it, is make decisions to be applied. A key tool for public action is spatial planning and all these protected sites, these management areas to be known. And there are strong requirements on these themes. Of course, for the efficiency of spatial planning, it's nice to make good decisions, but if these decisions are not known, they are useless. So it's also important for government transparency to have no hidden regulation. It's important for citizens, for investors, so they don't discover hidden regulation. Some illustration, you may wonder what is this strange thing, even if I make a zoom on it. In fact, it's a masterpiece coming from Louvre Museum. It comes from Babylonia a long time ago, from King Hammurabi, and it was considered as a good king because he was the first one to publish his laws in this stone. At this time, it was possible to find all the laws in a single place. So our deliverables in core data are mainly for deciders, and there is a clear message. I will say to decider, it's busy Hammurabi of 21st century, because even now it may be a challenge to find all this regulation and regulation area in a single place. Another learnings, it's about more the method. Of course, geographic information is used, I will say, by basic GIS, making spatial analysis, combining data and making maps. But it's more and more used for computation in applications, for prediction of hazard, for impact of climate change in a given area, simulation model, and things like this. So there is this increasing use of geographic information, and I think we are still at the beginning. This use will really grow in future. So it's just to know more. If you are interested more in the step about the core data scope, documents are available in UN-GGIM website. And if you are interested in our next phase about the content, the more detailed specification, there is a presentation, I think, tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you, Dominique, for this presentation. And I will allow one, at maximum 2 questions for 2 reasons, because you can't listen to 5 presentations and have all the questions. And the other reason is Dominique has to jump into another parallel session. So you have time for 1 or 2 questions. There's the micro. Okay. If there is no... Oh, there's one question.
Okay, I'm interested to see what will be the next step. Now you defined core data sets, but what next? What will happen with that core data sets?
The idea now is to make recommendation for content about the selected themes, to encourage that there is a minimum data content in whole Europe, not only the politic Europe, but it's about geographic Europe. So it's just recommendation, but to ensure some minimum content, we estimate the most necessary to fulfill this SDG.
Okay. Thank you very much. We do not have any time for more questions. Thank you very much, Dominique. I would like to invite the next speaker. It's Hugo Pohlmann from the European Commission, and he will give a presentation. Where is it? On geospatial information for urban sustainable development, goal monitoring, and should be there. I think so. Okay.
Oh, that's already one slide. Past. Good afternoon, everybody. So just to introduce where I come from, I'm working for the European Commission for DG Regional and Urban Policy, and in that DG we've got a unit dealing with policy development and economic analysis, where I'm responsible for geographic information analysis and management. So I think in a certain sense this presentation will follow quite neatly after the previous one, because basically I will give you a few examples of how we did some analysis in trying to showcase the interest of using geospatial information for the monitoring of the specific urban sustainable development goal. Now, as you all probably all know, and you've seen the overview of the SDGs. Goal 11 is the urban sustainable development goal. And, well, in the overview, I will briefly present a few of the targets and the related indicators there. Then say a few words on the potential for use of geospatial information in that context, what the main data infrastructure preconditions are to fulfill this kind of use potential, talk about two use cases, and then there will be a few conclusions and outlook. So the full text of the SDG goal 11 is to make cities inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. And amongst the targets and the related indicators, there are a few of them where there's a very explicit link to the spatial concept, even inside the cities, to provide access to safe, accessible, and sustainable transport for all by expanding public transport. And there's this operationalized by the proportion of population that has convenient access to public transport, and also to provide universal access to safe, inclusive, and accessible green and public spaces. And that one is proposed to be operationalized by the share of built-up areas of cities that is open or public space. Now, while these, the way these indicators are operationalized is certainly the result of a lengthy global process, you can also already see here and there that, in fact, the spatial element it could be even optimized when looking at specific situations in cities. Because, for example, when we are looking at access to public transport, this convenient access, we think this should not be seen at the level of all cities in a country, or at the level of what is happening over the whole territory of a city, but it should also include the spatial distribution of this access inside a city. Same goes for green and public spaces. There, an indicator on the share, the mere presence of open space, should be linked to the presence of population and the distribution of population throughout the city. So, in fact, ideally, these kind of indicators should, in one way or another, take into account the spatial diversity of cities in terms of population distribution and also in terms of the provision of the services, be it public transport or green or open spaces. Now, this means that we are talking here about cities. First thing to decide upon, what areas are we talking about? Then, not only at European scale, at global scale, we're facing issues of comparability of what is defined as a city, as an urban area. Therefore, we propose the use of a people-based definition, an extent of a city defined on the basis of the distribution of population, population size, and density combined, and based on a regular population grid of 1 square kilometer resolution, making this definition less dependent on the arbitrary political administrative limits of municipalities, cities, and so on. And currently, such a definition exists at European scale and is being promoted for extension at a more global scale as well. Next, we should also have comparable land use information with a compatible street network with adequate network segment attributes, informing about the suitability of the network for pedestrians, for example. And there, in the few use cases you will see, we relied upon Copernicus Urban Atlas land use data and on comprehensive street network data from commercial sources or from OpenStreetMap. And finally, the infrastructure also requires a detailed high-resolution population distribution dataset, where this can be ideally based on a regular population grid, and then can be usefully downscaled using Urban Atlas land use information and building footprint data. So the first use case deals with access to public transport, how to operationalize this notion of convenient access to public transport. One idea was to take all the access points, the bus stops, metro stations, rail stations, and to define areas of easy walking distance around them. And we took a search radius of 5 minutes walking to a bus or a tram stop, 10 minutes walking to metro or rail stations. Why this difference? Because it's a reasonable assumption to think that people will be prepared to walk a bit further to a place where they can find a more reliable or a faster service. And taking into account the level of service offered at these points in terms of the number of departures per hour, we will combine this information with the population distribution in the neighborhood of all these stops. And this allows for the calculation of summary measures at city level or at any sub-city level if required. So metric, one single figure per city we can compute then is the population-weighted median number of departures that is available within walking distance. We can also classify the population of a city according to the level of access found in their neighborhood. We could also do this for workplace-based employment if a high-resolution employment distribution is available for a particular city, which is a substantial different and more challenging topic than the distribution of residential population, obviously. So we have applied this kind of methodology to a number of European cities and territories for which we found timetable data, and this is the main bottleneck of this kind of analysis, open data on a comprehensive set of open data on all public transport modes in a particular territory. And what you see colored here are the cities in territories for which we were able to find those data. It doesn't cover, by all means, the European territory. But yeah, okay, that's the state of play in terms of what you can draw from open data. Still, it demonstrates the quite different level of availability of public transport services, taking into account the population distribution inside the city. And on the other hand, you can also split the population into categories of different service levels, from no access at all within walking distance to a very high access, which supposes the availability at least of some metro or train services. Now, with some further methodological developments, we can also assess the accessibility to population, not only looking at the presence of services in the neighborhood of the population and their address, but also accessibility to population or to employment in cities by using public transport, if required, combined with walking distance. This requires origin-destination calculations between all building blocks of a city, so this is quite computationally intensive. Moreover, you need to take into account the frequency of the services, so you need to repeat your origin-destination calculations numerous times in order to grasp this frequency of services. But on the other hand, the advantage is that the results are scalable in terms of where you produce your indicators. You could produce an indicator of accessibility at building block level or go up to city level. And so in a few test cases, we assessed the absolute number of population or also employment accessible within 45 minutes of travel by public transport and combined by walking if required. And we can also derive some indicator of frequency of these services. This is work in progress. We are trying to extend this to much more cities, but there's still some computational challenge involved as well. Second use case is on access to green urban areas. As the Copernicus Urban Atlas contains the urban areas defined as green urban areas and also forests, we selected those and we assessed basically the surface of green areas available within walking distance from each inhabited urban atlas polygon. So the recipe is not too different from what we did with public transport, but by assessing the overall surface of green urban areas one can reach within its neighborhood. This can be aggregated at city level again weighted by the spatial population distribution, and we get a population weighted median surface of nearby green urban areas. And we see that in comparison to the classical indicator on the simple share of green urban areas in the total surface of a total land area of the city, you see on the y-axis, that the median surface of accessible green urban areas, so the one that takes into account the spatial location of population, that this indicator is quite complementary. The correlation between the two is quite weak. And so that this indicator adds information, substantially adds information in comparison to the classical one. And so it allows for an assessment of the equity of the availability of green urban areas in relationship to the spatial distribution of population. Just skip those. These just illustrate the two indicators. The data also allow for the visualization of the distribution of population according to the surface area. And the slower the slope goes down, the more equitable the distribution of green urban areas in relationship to population is. So, time for conclusions. I think it's obvious that geospatial indicators can add insight next to the official SDG indicator list, because they are spatially scalable if the adequate data are available. They can look into the situation of neighborhoods, communities inside cities, and the aggregates at city levels can much more reflect spatial patterns and diversity inside the city. Still, there are numerous challenges still to be faced. Openness and availability of data can be still challenging, especially on public transport, for example. There is definitely the need for more thematic precision on public access to open space. Urban Atlas, for example, considers all green urban areas as accessible. There might be private spaces in there. The Royal Park of Brussels is included there, but it's definitely not accessible to the public. And local, timely data on population breakdown and by age, by gender, by disabilities is certainly problematic. So, if you want to know more about this, there are a few papers where the methodologies are explained, and a few of them are subject to a relatively forthcoming update with some more data included. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Hugo, for this very nice presentation, also showing use cases, how Inspire, Copernicus, and open data can be used. So I would like to allow 1 or 2 questions to Hugo. That was explicitly clear. So due to the time constraints, I would like to move to the third presenter. It's Nariman Damani from the University of Strasbourg. And she will give a presentation on does Inspire affect positively the private sector in France. So, the last one is, here it is.
Hi everyone, it's a great pleasure to be here today. I'm Nariman Damani, a PhD student at the Beta at the University of Strasbourg. My thesis is about the economic value and the impact of geographical information. Today I will talk about the effects of Inspire on the private sector, and I have to precise that this work is still in progress. As you may all know, the Directive Inspire was transposed into the French law in October 2010. And then in August 2015, the French government has enacted a law named Loi Nôtre, stipulating that local authorities have to handle geographical information, and especially through spatial data infrastructure. Some objectives of the transposition of this directive into the French law are economical. First, it says that Inspire would allow the implementation of better services for citizens and companies, and moreover, it would promote economic growth and job creation, not only the development of geographical information, but many activities which need geographical information to create new services. Before getting in the heart of the matter, some literature review on spatial data information. In 2009, Asil Tasman showed that in absence of barriers to access to data, it can have an additional growth of nearly 1%. Recently, in Switzerland, Frick and Al in 2016 brought to light that 23% of the firm reported that 1/3 of their revenues come from the geographical information. And more precisely on Inspire, investing on this directive proved to be profitable for the economies. The research method I used in this article is qualitative and explorative, based on interviews of public and private actors. The public actors of French regions, Alsace, Aquitaine, Nord-Pas-de-Calais, Pays de Loire, and Provence-Alpes-Côte d'Azur, and some companies from the private sectors. We made around 40 hours of interview with, as I've already said, 5 regions and around 20 companies. The interview frame is the same for everyone. We begin by the presentation of the actor and its activity. Then we ask questions about the production or the use of geographical information in the activity of the actor. To finish, we investigate the economic impact of geographical information and the role and importance of regional spatial data infrastructure. To represent the result, we build this scheme. It represents the transmission channels of geographical information. The heart of the figure is, of course, geographical information. There is a lot of interaction around it. We have, on the left, the producers of gross geographical information, which means producers aerial photography and cartography and so on. Then on the right, you have the services dedicated to geographical information. Here you find the firms delivering spatial data, infrastructure, and everything around it. And, for example, consulting firms. Below, the geographical information, the firms you see are only firms using geographical information to create new services. We separated the firms creating new services for other firms and the one which created new services for the customers. The firms using geographical information to create new services for other firms can be divided in two categories. The one using geographical information to improve efficiency, and the others to develop an existing market. About the effect of Inspire, you must have in mind that Inspire goes through SDI, so we investigate the impact of SDI. Its positive effects on the services dedicated to SDI, because, I'm sorry, I'm lost. Indeed, as the Directive Inspire imposed to build SDI, this kind of job is clearly needed, and their activities improved from this moment. Then you have a negative effect, a small negative effect on the producers of geographical information. Some producers of geographical information, like aerial photographers, have lost a lot of market share. Before the existence of SDI and Inspire, they could sell, for example, the same aerial photography 7 times, and due to the mutualization which came with Inspire, they only can sell it once. It's only a small part of the producers of geographical information that have lost market share and which did not benefit from the Inspire directive. And then, for the firms using geographical information to create new services, there is no effect of Inspire. They need geographical information for their activities, but the information do not come from regional spatial data infrastructure or something related to Inspire. Most of the time, the data come from Google or Google Maps. This is explained by two reasons. On one hand, they do not have the knowledge of the existence of this kind of infrastructure, and on the other hand, they are aware of the existence of this kind of infrastructure, but they cannot use them because of the difficulty to access to them or to use them. Here a summary of what I've already said. So a positive impact on the services dedicated to geographical information jobs, a negative one because of the loss of share markets, and no impacts. We didn't see an impact of Inspire and of the SDI on the firms using GI to create new services, which is explained, I've already said, by the fact that the vector of transmission of Inspire in the regional level is the SDI, and there is a lack of knowledge of the existence of those and the complexity and accessibility restriction to the regional SDI. As a conclusion, we can say that as Inspire goes through SDI, there is most firms that we have analyzed did not know about the existence of local SDI, and our results need to be qualified because we didn't see all the existing sectors, and for example, we didn't see sectors which are related to tourism or transport, so we don't have the total, we don't have a general vision of the economy, and we do not have explored the area of open data, even though Inspire has encourages the implementation of this kind of data. But, however, even if we provided mixed results, we highlight that there is a huge economic potential, and especially on value creation and efficiency for the firms. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Nariman, particularly for keeping the time, but also for this very nice presentation and showing how the private sector in France is going to use Inspire, hopefully. So Are there any questions? There's one.
Yeah, it was really an interesting presentation because it showed both the positive and the negative effects of things taking place. I think you should have a look at the SME Spire study that was done a few years ago, because that tackled the same issue, although it's already somehow outdated and it doesn't cover France. Maybe one additional question, and I think it was, you mentioned it in the introduction, but you didn't mention it in the conclusion, or I missed it, but are there any differences, or do you see differences between the regions, and what do you see as the main task of a region? Is just making data available, or should they also try to help, support, engage the companies? Do you already have some insight on that?
I don't really have insights, but if I can give my opinion, the local authorities should make the data more available and more accessible, because this is the most important reason that the private sector do not use this data, because if you are not in the field of geography, it's really hard to understand and to find what you are looking for, or what you want. So maybe to make it more easy to understand for non-professional people.
Is there any other question? Okay, then thank you very much again. The next speaker is here. I'm quite happy because I haven't seen him before, but I think it's Jordi Sandalinas, and he will give a presentation on big data. So. Okay, here it is.
Thank you very much. Okay, hi everybody. Thank you very much for assisting today at my lecture, and also I would like to thank the organizers for your kindness. I'm a lawyer. I'm also very concerned about the environment. And I'm also interested in how we can implement, how we can implement new technology trends, not only to visualize, not only to be concerned, but also if we can use the results of that research to react, because we are facing some environmental facts that are quite disappointing at the moment. But regardless of my environmentalist approach, I would like to give you some facts about big data, also whether we can enshrine big data within the INSPIRE directive. Also, we have another directive regarding environmental liability, which is based on the principle that polluter pays, and also some challenges and potential solutions. And if I have some time left, I will give you some statistics about environmental, the latest news. So as you all probably know, big data is a technology that is capable of managing and solving complex issues if there's a decision-making head behind the result of all the statistics that are capable of being extracted from the environment. I'm also concerned about the marine environment. So if you don't be surprised if I am giving you some insights about the marine ecosystems. So as I say, big data is a technological tool that can use huge data sets require new software applications. Some of them are the Argo project and also the Neptune project, to name but a few, but also we have the GOS and the COI and the OI, excuse me. The capacity of big data is quite impressive, because in 2013, up to 30 petabytes, the equivalence with gigabytes, it's written in the screen, of data were obtained, which constitutes a total of 3 billion files per day obtained from in situ sectors and satellites at the same time. So as I referred before, some software tools developed are the Argo, which features more than 10,000 buoys deployed. Buoys are, well, could be considered as in situ sectors. And also, it's important to notice that this NASA satellite called Aquarius has gathered in 2 months more information that the in situ sensors in the last 125 years. Again, about marine big data. Some years ago, it was kind of utopia to speak about marine big data. But now it's a fact. And some projects like the Ergo software initiative has deducted that there's been a change in the hydrological cycle from 1950 to 2000 as revealed by the ocean salinities. As you probably know, the Copernicus program deals with files, raw data concerning biochemistry, change of temperatures, current tides, ice sheet, and it's quite a useful tool to visualize and to realize, but it's not enough because we need to react. So why marine big data? There are different factors that has been expressed and published by some academics. So some facts regarding marine big data are the diverse data sources that are capable of gathering information, the issue regarding temporality and spatiality, because oceans cover, unless I'm mistaken, almost, if not more than 60 or 70% of the surface of the Earth planet, and high-dimensional fields of research are capable of being covered and studied. There's a huge volume of data, as I have said before, and there's some security issues that need to be taken into account when collecting such data. And also confidentiality trends are really important to be taken into account. So this diagram here, I obtained this diagram after some months of researching, because it shows the progression of the big data extraction until the application. I'm going just to focus on the conclusion because I would like to be brief, but in case you're interested in my presentation, I can really send you all this information with no problem. So the decision-making, the decision capacity is really important because the process of acquiring all this information is shown below in the diagram, because here you have all the sensors, satellite buoys, aerial detection stations, ships, and undersea sensor capable of detecting the situation of the seabed and the seafloor, and the species and the ecosystem featuring in the deep seas. In this regard. So, as I said, the decision support behind all this data is very important because not only prevention, but action is required. So, where all this new technology called big data can be featured in the SPY Directive. So, as far as I'm concerned, Article 3 defines spatial data, referring to any data with a direct or indirect reference to a specific location or geographical area. So spatial data, which could form a spatial data set, and also metadata could be comprised and understood as a big data when captured, analyzed, and decided upon. Also the environmental directive, as I referred to, that establishes this principle of polluter pays, could refer to big data, even though the terms big data are not referred in that directive. So Annex 1 of the environmental directive could refer to all the notion of big data. So I will omit the reading of all this, because if you have the directive, or you can ask me after that, I can provide you with the information. So the challenges and potential solutions, that's what I'm more concerned of, because we all know the technologies that might help us to visualize, might help us to detect, to be concerned about the data. But again, as an environmentalist, I cannot be happy with that. So, because we need a decision-making, as I would say, lobby behind all this that could help us to prevent and to react once there's some oil spilling, drilling, fracking activities, sound pollution, acoustic marine pollution that can, for instance, harm in marine ecosystems, can harm the radar systems of some marine mammals. Marine trade, the ship routes are overwhelming, actually, because they seem to alter the migration process of all these marine mammals that are on a scary rate of extinction. So marine overexploitation and overharvesting are also two features that we have to realize that need to be, again, rethought, let me put it this way. What about big data before courts? As an attorney, I'm always thinking about court, not because I want to create problems, but in case there's not a solution behind a prevention strategy, because if there's an oil company that is not concerned about having some smart consultant service, but is more concerned about paying the consequences of and the liabilities of an oil spilling. So what is the solution if big data is properly used? So in my opinion, big data reports as signed by specialists could constitute evidence before courts. Also, finally, there's a need to educate with environmental values, because behind every technology we need to have like some values, some principles that are capable of leading us to respect the environment. So I believe I have maybe 4 minutes or so. Okay, so I would say some statistics. One of 8 birds species are at risk of extinction. 1 out of 4 mammals are at risk of extinction. 75% of our generic diversity of the agricultural crops has been lost. 75% of the world's fisheries are fully or overexploited. Up to 70% of the world's known species are at risk of extinction if the global temperature rises by more than 3.5%. The list goes on. In a report, I'm sure you've heard about the Marine Strategy Framework Directive and the Marine Spatial Planning Directive. So when they were published in the official journal, there were some deadlines established, 2020, 2022. Those are the 2 deadlines established within the directive those directives are already into force. What's going on with these directives? That they need to be implemented by the member states of the European Union in order to reach to an optimal good status of the environment. So in 2014, the directive, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, was revised in 2000. That was the one that was published in 2008, as far as I'm concerned. August 28th, I'm not sure. Anyway, the report, as prepared by the European Union, the Commission, I believe, established that 39% of the stocks in the Northeast Atlantic, the 88% of the Mediterranean and the Black Seas are overfished. So, again, the North Sea, the data is endless. The North Sea, over 90% of the Fulmar seabirds have plastic in their stomach. I mean, when all this is going to end? I don't know. So if there are some reports that if you're concerned about the environment, you could go and do some research about the particles per million of the carbon dioxide. In 2013, I believe that the levels as research by the Observatory of the Mauna Loa were 400 particles per million. In 2017, 4 years after, now the level has reached up to 407 particles per million. Unless I'm mistaken, if we reach up to 450 particles per million, which could be, I hope not, in 2040, then we could be in serious problem. So, okay, visualizing, gathering information is enough, but it's not enough. We need to raise the consciousness, raise our awareness, and make sure that this technology is going to be worth for having a better oceans and some sustainable environment to live in, not for us, but for our kids. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jorge, for this very nice presentation. I would like to open the floor for questions.
During your presentation, which was a good, passionate presentation, you several times you did a call for action. What is your suggestion as an action?
Yes. Thank you so much for your question. Prevention. We need to gather as many professionals that are capable of gathering data. For instance, anybody involved in the Copernicus program, you know the Copernicus program that provides data regarding biochemistry. So what is the level of ocean acidification? What is the level of carbon dioxide? Which are the levels of the isotopes? That there are several studies published by marine biologists that explain that the rise of carbon dioxide is unbearable. So if we had like working groups capable of gathering all that information, we could make like lobbies with companies, organizations, all those actors that work and take profit out of the exploitation of the, for instance, marine environment, and could tell them, look, this is the situation, this is what's happening, and these are the consequences. So I know it's an utopia, but it's nice, right? So we could tell them, look, this is the way it is. You should have like a plan, like some policy, because we have the laws, but we don't have, as far as I know, the policy guidelines that they should follow. In fact, about the Marine Strategy Framework Directive that establishes some deadline, 6 years after all the parameters of the directive were not complied by the states. So if a country is not capable of complying with that directive, what's going to happen with the companies? In fact, I remember that the Netherlands as a country, faced a proceeding because the Netherlands was not complying with one of the directives, unfortunately. So lobbying, gathering companies, gathering actors, gathering institutions, and raise the awareness. That's the prevention. The reaction, well, if you pollute, then you're going to pay. You're going to go to court. But then we have to decide, as a big company, what's the policy? What do you prefer, to pay, for instance, 6,000 euro in a consulting firm that's telling you what not to do, or let your insurance company to pay $10 million for cleaning the Gulf of Mexico, and this is not going to happen. So that's the way I see it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There would be time for one more short question and a short answer.
Short answer. I'm really moved. I'm sorry. Yeah. Roger.
Well, the question is, I mean, if you're looking at global action or action that within a body that already exists, what work is the WWF Oceans Unit doing? The Worldwide Fund has a global oceans biodiversity unit as part of its organization, and it is a global organization, and WWF does have an impact when it attacks a problem. We're working with them right now on a biodiversity thing as well. So have you approached them, or do you have any idea what they do? I still don't even quite know what they do from their website. But
Unfortunately, thank you for your question. Unfortunately, I have not approached the WO and the WWF organizations. I would love to, but my personal take on this is that the smaller the approach, the better the solution. So by taking small steps, then we could reach to a bigger step. But indeed, the more politicized are those organizations, the less public interest there in there, the better. It's not that I'm the ultimate anarchist, but I say we need to take serious action and try to skip some bureaucracy protocols that could just make it slow and endless. You know. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jordi, for this answer. And I would like to move on to the last speaker of this session. It's Anne Charéron-Percher, and her title is Smart Cities Towards a French Strategy. So I will try. The top one. This one? Yes.
Yes.
It's a PDF one?
Yeah.
Okay.
To put it on
It's on the screen. I'm not French speaking.
no, it should be it's affichage.
This one, mode?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Just to introduce me very quickly, I was working until last August in the Ministry of Environment. Well, it changed the name very often, so the last name was Ecology and Environment, and it covers energy, transport, all these kind of issues in France. And I was in charge of smart cities. So the work I'm going to present you now was made last year when I was in charge of smart cities in this ministry, but I just left in August, and now I'm working on a consultant on a private basis. So just to say a few, this is just to give you a very short presentation of what is a French smart city. It's Lyon, the Quartier de la Confluence, which is a new area of Lyon, and which with a lot of information technologies, but not only from a technological point of view. So, in introduction, the work I want to present you is really a collective work. So, what we have done in France is to have a working group which have worked for about 1 year with people from the industry, with people from local government, from researchers, NGOs, and we bring together all these people, and we discuss a lot. We had like about 6 or 7 meetings, and what I will present you is really the result of this work. So it's not it's recommendation which were made by this working group, but it's not it's not a policy which is already implemented in France. So we will see what's happening in the future. Just the first thing, the prerequisite was really we didn't want to give a definition of smart cities because it's impossible. So the idea was really to share a vision, a common vision on smart cities. So we thought that there are 3 main points that we put forward. The first one is that we don't think that we have to smart city for smart city. Smart city is not an end in itself. There is really a close relationship between smart and sustainable issues. That's the first thing. The second thing is that also very important is to put the user of the consumer really in the core of a project. So all the projects should be citizen or user oriented. And the third point is really the impact of the local context, because you have different kind of smart cities, and the smart city depends really from the local context. So that were really the 3 points that we shared when we were talking about smart cities. So the first thing that we did was really to analyze the French context before starting recommendation. So we found out that there are different features at the local and at the national level. At the local level, there are many projects which are started by local governments, but with different level of maturities. You have cities who are pioneers, like Lyon or Nice, and you have cities who are just starting their project. And also there is a big difference between large and small cities. I think it's not it's the same in other European countries, and so there was a study which was very provocative, which said smart cities and stupid villages, but it's just to say that there is a big difference in terms of means and possibilities to start projects between small and big cities. At the national level, there is a very strong impulse which is given by the national government, but there are different bodies who are in charge of smart cities. For instance, the Ministry of Economics and Industry is very concerned. And on the other hand, my ministry, the Ministry of Environment and Ecology and Transport, was also very concerned. And I must say that they don't communicate a lot. And also there is not very much communication between the people who are in charge of urban issues and the people who are in charge of digitalization. So the situation was really not very segmented, I would say. And the second point important at the national level is really the awareness of all economic opportunities which are linked to smart cities. So, well, this is just to illustrate our vision. It's a poster which has been made by Paris. Just the figures, so you try to illustrate what I said. 500 million euro is the amount of the participative budget. The two others are refers to crowdsourcing, and the third one is the and the last one, 1 month, is referred to e-government. So that's every month the mayor of Paris has a dialogue with the Parisian. So what are the main recommendations? There are 4 lines of action which has been identified. The first one is accelerate the deployment of innovation. The second one, well, we can read them. I don't need to read them. I will focus on the 1 to 3, and let the fourth for question if you have question. So accelerate the deployment of innovation. In France, like in other European countries, we have started a lot of pilot projects. We have programs to support, to bring financial support to pilot projects. But we found out that now the issue is not to start new pilot projects, but to see how we can deploy the pilot project and scale up the pilot project. So there are different, we identify some possibilities to reach this objective. The first one is really to promote new forms of public procurement, more flexible, and when we have called for proposal, to put more emphasis on the replicability criteria. The second thing also that we identified was the fact that local government sometimes, or even industry, they told us that they need, of course, they need financial support, but very often the financial aspect is not the most important. All the obstacles come from regulatory questions, from administrative barriers, and so what we were expecting from the national government was really to help them, to bring them some kind of regulatory support to achieve their project, to be able to implement their project, because they were facing really a lot of administrative problems that they cannot solve by themselves. Also, in terms of proposal, the question of dissemination was very important. Dissemination through assessment. We have very few. I must say that we have very few assessments of what come out from our pilot project, but also dissemination through networks. We in Spain, for instance, we are very good in smart cities. We have a network of 89 cities in smart cities, and they are very effective. In France, we don't have that, and I think that it's very, very important to have really direct relationship between cities to learn from each other. Okay, the second point was better articulate urban and digital policies. As I told you, the people in charge of urban questions and the people in charge of dissemination of digitalization don't speak together. So we found that we have to put them around the table. So for that, the prerequisite, I would say, is really that these people, especially at the local level, they share a common vision of smart cities, which is really based on a sort of cross-fertilization between urban and digital issues. So as we were the Ministry of Environment, we focused on the role of urban planners, and we made some proposal to have more involvement of urban planners, or more so that the urban planners were more concerned by digitalization. So some refers to tools like GIS or this kind of tool you are talking about, but we have to, the urban planners, they have to use a lot of digital tools to facilitate simulation, visualization of projects, and in order to have a more integrated approach, because a very important point of smart city is really to go beyond sectoral approach and have a sort of more integrated approach. And all these tools of visualization and simulation, they help to have this more integrative approach. Also, they help to facilitate communication with the inhabitants or the economic actors, all the players, all the people involved by the project. So we are really in favor of using more of these tools. And also, when it comes to when you are thinking about urban projects, our planners, I guess it's not typically French, as I understood, but they are thinking in terms of infrastructure or in terms of equipments, and they have to change their mind and think more in terms of service-based solutions. So it's really a change of mind, and I can tell you it is quite difficult to, it's the most difficult is to change the culture. So this is what we identify. Third line of action is governing with data. As you know, all of you, data is really the new gold. It's really very important. So just one remark I want to say that in the first stage we thought that information technologies were essentially viewed as a way to optimize urban management. And we are now at another step, I would say, a second step, where information technologies and digitalization is really helping to have a more collaborative city with people working together and more communication to build a project without, it's not top-down, I would say, it's just horizontal collaboration. So access to data is key, as a lot of people said before. So open data is one thing. We are, of course, in favor of open data, but the issue is really that there is a sort of appropriation of data by the users. So in the ministry, we have done a lot of hackathon. I don't know if it's an English word anyway, or barcamps of this kind of event, so that the people can appropriate the data and build new services which are useful for the urban players. The second thing is really reinforce the legal framework at the national level. So both the obligation for in energy and transport to open the data, but also all what is related to protection of personal data. I don't want to say a lot about that because it's something that most of you know very well. And the third issue, which is important one, is the capacity building issue. As I said, small cities don't have the same possibilities as big cities, so we are really in favor of pooling their resources so that they are more, so they can share and they can access to new services. Also, it is important, we think, that instead of having, for instance, when we are talking about urban platform, instead of having one specification for each city, the idea is to have joint specification, which is very also useful for the industry, because instead of having different specification, they have one type of specification which is common for several cities. And we see that some cities are hiring chief data officer, which is something very new, but we have to encourage that sort of thing. I don't want to speak about promote the French know-how on smart city because I don't have time. I think if you have questions, I can answer. The only thing I want to say is that we are very concerned about standardization, and both at the international and the European level, and also to strengthen the participation of French actors in European programs and initiatives, because I don't know if you know this SCC1, Smart Cities and Communities in Horizon 2020, but there are very few French cities which are involved, so we really have something to do for that. So in conclusion, because I try to watch the hour, my conclusion, it's difficult to make a conclusion because, as you know, we have had a new government in spring. So all this recommendation, all this work was made during the last government. Now we have a new government, we have a new minister. So all the recommendations are on the table, but we don't know yet if they will be picked up by the new administration and the new minister. So I must say that everything is open. What I know is that they are interested, and other ministries, like the Ministry of Economy, is very interested in the work we have done. So I have some hope. And so my conclusion will come from Saskia Sassen, who is an American sociologist, and it reflects my view of smart cities. The challenge is to urbanize technologies rather than using technologies which disurbanize the city. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Anne, for this presentation. You don't have to be concerned because you are ahead of time. There is time for some questions. There's one question here.
I hope it's an easy question. It has to do with vision. You said you have to build a shared vision for smart cities.
Yeah.
And the thing is, when you look at smart city initiatives globally, and outside of Europe especially, but also in Europe, you have lots of different visions being developed. And sometimes you have a national vision, which is promoted by the Ministry of Interior, Ministry of Economic Development, whatever. But then you end up with visions down at the province, individual state level, let's say at Lander, you have visions down at the municipality level. And at the end of the day, it's the municipalities that end up bearing the brunt of implementing the smart city technology and the extra cost of putting that technology in place over quite a long period of time. It doesn't happen overnight. So what's your experience, based on your studies and your knowledge here in France, on having a common shared vision for smart cities? Is there such a thing as one common vision for smart cities?
Yes, there is. What I can say is that in the working group, there were representatives of local governments and there were representatives of industry. And sometimes the vision was not exactly the same between the people from the industry and the people from the local government. And we have a lot of discussion. But at the end of the day, the three feature, the three that I presented you represent really the vision that we want to promote at the national level, which is a sort of consensus between the industry and the because, for instance, the industry, they were really they were not very at the beginning. They were not demand oriented. They were more business oriented, I would say. But talking, it was an opportunity for them to talk with their clients, because their clients are the local government, and so they changed their mind. I mean, slowly, but they changed their mind. So that's. So the thing that the three things that I present, the three features that I presented, really represent the vision that we want to share in France, which is not very different from the vision which is at the European level, if you know, or the vision that some countries have in Spain, for instance, but which is very different from the vision that you have in Korea or that you have in some Chinese cities, for instance.
There's another question here.
The question will be in the standards part you came to towards the end. So I'm Peter Parslow from UK. I'm part of our shadow committee on smart and sustainable communities for the UK, from the put in there as a geo person. So there are a lot of different international standards groups looking at different aspects of smart cities. The ones I'm involved in, but we're very happy to have some French people involved, I'm sure. But do you know which ones France is getting actively involved in, and where?
France is very involved in ISO.
So the ISO TC is
TC 268.
Because that's all that. So the one I'm involved with, all the IT aspects of smart cities have been given to a joint committee with IEC. So it's actually separate from that one, which is looking at the social and planning at the managerial level ones, which is obviously necessary too. But if you've got anyone interested in the IT aspects of smart cities.
I know that there is some, because there are different bodies of normalization who are concerned with smart cities. You have the one which is in the ITC, and you have others who are more related to real estate or to sustainable development. But I know that there is an effort of coordination at the European level. I was invited at a meeting with, I can give you the name of a person in England who is organizing that, because I know that they are trying to, instead of having different bodies of normalization, they are trying to bring together all the bodies and especially have the people from ITC working with the people from sustainable development and urban planning.
Thank you.
There would be time for one more question. If that is not the case, I may ask you one question, because I would like to refer to the first presentations from Dominique and Hugo, and they refer to the United Nations Sustainable Development Indicator Framework. And can you explain how this indicator framework on a global level has influenced your French strategy? So has there been discussions on that?
It was a little bit, you mean the Objective 11?
Yes,
yeah,
the Goal 11.
The Goal 11, yeah, it was, well, I was involved in France. I mean, it's through myself, I would say, because I was in charge of this working group on smart cities, and also I was in charge of the Goal 11 in the ministry. So what I try to do is to make the bridge, which is not very easy, because the Goal 11 is really very broad. So, for instance, they give very few in this Goal 11 in France. They didn't pay attention to digitalization, for instance. Very few attention to digitalization. So, what I try to do is to say, be aware that digital is the future. And that you have to take into account. And even if you look at what happened in developing countries, in some African countries, they are very, they have projects, they are using cellular to communicate and to do a lot of things, to pay for payment and all that. So this is not typical to France. And so in Goal 11, you really have to take into account this question of digitalization.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne, and thank you very much. And this concludes our session for today on environmental, economic, and social impact assessments. A very wide range of issues have been discussed, and I would like to thank the presenters, Dominique Laurent, Hugo Pohlmann, Narimen Damani, Jordi Sandalinas, he's not here anymore, and Anne Charéron-Perchet. So thank you very much to the audience as well for your attention, and see you soon during these days.